Okay, now I'm just going to run through my Ableton Live default set. This is what I would see every time I open up Ableton to make a tune, including my latest tune. So let's get into it. Initially, I have my BPM set to 127, and then I'll have a drum group with various different channels in, a bass group, a vocal group, a pad group, an effects group. Sorry, these aren't groups, these are just individual channels, and this is an effects group within and has effects channels within it. On the drum group, I'll typically have a drum bus and an EQ, because I don't really want a lot of things on there. This is just for my default, and the two things that I always end up using are drum bus and an EQ. But on the kick, I'll have a sampler. I'll have the velocity turned all the way down, because by default it's set to 35 or 45? 35. So I'll have that all the way down, and then volume at -6, so that it's just ready to go, so that I can just drop my whatever kick I like in, and I'm ready to get moving. And then a saturator again, and then an EQ, a utility, and a spectrum analyzer. This utility is just to bring the level up or down after I've done any processing on the kick, and see how it looks using the spectrum analyzer. On the clap channel, I have a drum rack, because I tend to use multiple clap samples, so I'll have a drum rack with which allows me to drop in loads of different samples rather than having one sample like this. It is a sort of composite of loads of different ones. And then again, saturator, EQ, utility, and spectrum, pretty standard stuff, but it means that I don't have to reach for a saturator when I definitely know I'm going to probably use one on my clap channel. I can just have it there. My tops group is made up of a top loop channel, hats, and an offbeat hat. So for the offbeat hat, I'll typically have multiple offbeat hat samples, like long 909 samples. These are for this channel. This is what I mean by offbeat hat, is the kind of like tss, 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 kind of sound that you hear a lot in house music. So I have a whole channel dedicated to that. Again, sampler, EQ, spectrum, and utility. And then the hats this is for anything that isn't the offbeat hat, so like incidentals and accent hats and things like that. So basically the same as the offbeat hat channel, but I'm just keeping them separate. And then the top loop channel, this is for any loops that I might want to drag in to audition when I'm making a track. Again, all the same stuff on there. And then a percussion MIDI channel using a drum rack again, because I'm going to be using lots of different samples, and a saturator, and all of that stuff that I have on the other channels again. I'm more just showing you all of these to sort of show you this is how I structure my tunes a lot of the time. I find it a lot easier to have the channels already there, so that I know, oh, okay, I'm doing the kick, and now I do the clap, and now I do the offbeat hat. So it's all there, and it's easy for me to follow, rather than thinking like, oh, what should I do next? Maybe I'll do blah, blah, blah. It's all there for me. And then I've just got a drum bus on the on the tops group there. So all of these are going into one group, and then running through a drum bus, which is then going to the drum group, which also has a drum bus on it. I use drum bus quite a lot, but it's great. Ableton really hit the nail on the head with that one. And then I have a bass channel. Got space to drop on any, like an operator or diva or whatever I want to use to make a bass line. Again, all the usual stuff, saturator, spectrum, and then I've got a LFO tool, because I just know that I'm going to want to use this to make space for the kick. Initially, I'll just have it on a very low setting so that it's not doing a lot of dipping, because there's been times where I've had it at 100 and I'm thinking, why is it dipping out so much? And then I forget that this is on here. But if I just have it quite subtle, it tends to do the work for me and I don't even notice. And I'm thinking, oh, the bass and the kick is sitting quite nice anyway. And that's because I've already got a LFO tool on there that's making the bass duck out of the way from the kick. And then I can always just come back here and tweak it if I want to. A vocal channel. I am actually gonna update my default live set. I update it as I go, and I think, oh, how can I add to it and make it better? I'm always thinking of ways to make it better. But generally, I make a lot of different types of music, and a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of different genres, but just a lot of different sounding music. So it's difficult to make a template that's that has a lot of stuff in it, because I'm oftentimes wanting to go in different directions for different songs. So yeah, and then a pad channel, and these aren't meant to be individual channels. I made this so that I can easily go here and duplicate it, and it's the same color, and I can just go pad 2 like that, and I can duplicate that one, and then, you know, rename it pad 3, and it will have all the same stuff on there. So, you know, I will have multiple pad channels in a song, but for the template, it's not very necessary. I can just duplicate it as I go. And then for the effects channel, even though I've just said that, I've now got 5 effects channels, all with the same stuff on. But I guess because I tend to use a lot of effects, and I think a lot of the times one of my faults is that things can sound a little bit disjointed. So to try and limit that, I've tried to combat that problem within the template by just allowing myself to have 5 channels, so that any effects that I use on them, I can just drag in effects, and I can just drag in samples, and they'll all be using the same effects, and then they'll all be going out in the same effects group. And then on there, I've just got an EQ. And then I've also got these 2 return tracks. This is drum reverb, but it can just be called a short reverb, really. All it is just a reverb with a short decay, and a bit of pre-delay so that any transients coming through aren't immediately being muddied. And yeah, it says drum reverb, but ultimately I tend to end up treating this as just a short reverb. And yeah, a low cut on there to stop any muddiness, and then a longer reverb, about 1.5 seconds, from the FabFilter Pro R, and I've got this one named as general reverb, but again, it's just a long reverb, short reverb and long reverb, and just taking out some of the lows on there. And then on my master, I've got this bounce in place module, which I talked about in the course, and I believe I have that key mapped to the letter J, and all this does is means you can resample stuff very quickly, and it's available for free from the Max for Live. I think it's free anyway, from the Max for Live store, and then just a FabFilter Pro L. My favourite limiter, I think. A lot of people swear by like the Oxford stuff, but FabFilter Pro L for me is just, I really like it. It's or a lot of people like the Ozone one as well. I do like the Ozone one, but it can get a little bit CPU heavy. So I like to use the FabFilter Pro L too. Very, very good limiter. And then just a Spectrum. I've got Spectrums on pretty much every channel, just because you want to see what you're doing. You know, you want to see where the frequencies are and what's peaking out and what there isn't enough of, what there's too much of, and things like that. In terms of like my default audio tracks, I'll have, whenever I create one, saturator and EQ is always on there. Within the EQ itself, by default, I have this low cut here that cuts exactly the same place, so that if I have a sample or something, I can just turn the EQ on, bang, turn it on, and then move on. I don't have to worry about all this other stuff, like moving it around, and you know, it just, any sort of extra time you can give yourself can really help your creative, well, it can help my creative flow. So yeah, I've got one there, and then a steeper one if I've got stuff that's really kind of got a lot of low end that I want to get rid of. So yeah, I've got that as my default preset. So I can just flick that on. And then the MIDI channel, whenever I open a MIDI channel, it just comes up with a drum rack, because a lot of the time I'm using it for percussion and claps and things like that. If I've already got a kick, I typically won't be adding another kick. But if I've got like percussion, I want to add more percussion. So I use a drum rack for percussion. So I've got that by default on there. Obviously, if I want to use a synth or whatever, I'll just delete the drum rack. Yeah, so on there, again, I've just got the EQ and the saturator and the spectrum. And that is about it for my default live track. Just a few simple channels and a little bit of basic mastering stuff on there, just a limiter to stop it going over 0. And that helps me, give me a bit of structure when I'm making my music, and kind of gives me like a guideline to follow when I'm making a track.